And we recorded the last one, you remember?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And yeah, I think it's pretty great to be able to listen to it again. Yeah.
All right. And your camera is not on right now.
Yeah. Is it a problem because I'm outside and I don't have that that fast of internet, so I just let it turned off.
No problem.
All right.
All right. So, how's your practice?
Yeah, it's going pretty good. I mean, I'm on my sitting practice. I really the last week I really tried to emphasize to really enjoy it and then really enjoy it when I lose the breath and get back to it. And this has been, yeah, it's been really great. I spent lots of time in jhanas and it's pretty enjoyable and pretty effective, I think. And yeah, and in daily life, it's the same. Every time I remember, I mean, in the past, it was often like, oh man, I just forgot again, and now it's more like, yes, I'm free again, and yeah, that's been pretty good, going pretty good, I think.
Yes, that major change in attitude is something that takes a while for a lot of new students to understand. That they bring their old habits in. So when they start meditating and finding out that things are different than what they had planned. In fact, one of the things that I wanted to share with you is kind of a humorous joke. And it comes from a quote from Jesus, where in the Bible, Jesus is quoted as saying, "Ye shall know the truth, but the truth shall set you free." Have you ever heard that? That's a very famous quote. "Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free."
Yeah, I heard that, yeah.
Yeah, but there is a third line. And the third line is stated this way: "Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free, but first it will piss you off."
Okay.
And what that means is that when we are seeking the truth itself, when we find it, will in fact disagree with and interfere with what we thought was going to be true. In other words, we have to confront our delusions. And that's what, in fact, is difficult for a lot of students. And that I've even had one student who he eventually wound up confessing that he would rather watch his mind, or not watch his mind, but just let his mind go because he enjoys his thoughts, rather than the bad feelings he has to deal with by recognizing that the mind has wandered away from the object of breath. So he said, "I'd rather meditate and not think about the breath and just let the mind do what he wants to do," which is in fact not any meditation at all. But some people have the magical belief that going through all of the outward signs of meditation, including buying a special cushion, setting special clocks, doing all of that kind of stuff, sitting in special postures, and as long as you're sitting there kind of still, holding with your eyes closed, that you can kind of do anything you want to on the inside and call that meditation. And that they'll get the benefits of meditation someday, somehow, that accumulate because there's a karma machine that knows that they're meditating or something like that.
Yeah.
And so this change in knowledge is the realization that, in fact, we can come out of the hindrances once we see them. And you recognize in the beginning that seeing those hindrances is kind of blah. Like, here we go again. But you've now made that change of attitude into, wow, now I know about this stuff, I can be free from it. I can throw it out. And that's a kind of success. It's a really important point of success to know that the way the Buddha states it, in fact, is no matter how much the mind is obstructed, that we know that we can throw that obstruction out of the mind and see the truth for the moment.
Yeah.
And that the Buddha talks about that as being, that's the first noble step that is not understood by ordinary people. That is the first noble step. Why? Because that first noble step is the ability to get beyond that the truth shall set you free, but first it'll piss you off. And if it pisses you off, then that's the ordinary mind. But if you can stay with that truth, oh no, I can in fact clean the mind out once I see it, then we become joyful about being able to do that. This is a very important point for students to be, in fact, the Buddha calls it the first step of the noble path. The first step of the path.
Right.
And that's quite amazing, isn't it? That you recognize, and it's a joyful point, that you're recognizing that there's a lot of joy in that success that's there.
Right.
So now it's time to move on with what do we do with a mind now that's fit for work. So since we've already started with that, I'll ask you that in review. Now that we have a mind that's fit for work, what do we do with a mind that's fit for work?
Well, we do the work. I mean, what I'm doing right now is I'm just trying to be on guard and be on the lookout for hindrances that put me out of the state again.
All right. That's a correct way of saying it. A more broadly way of saying it, that those hindrances then are suffering, and therefore you're on the lookout for dukkha, which is exactly the right way of going. In fact, that's what both the Buddha and Bhikkhu Buddhadasa makes a big point of, is that the only way that we can really understand the Eightfold Noble Path and the Four Noble Truths is with a mind that's fit for work, a mind that's free from hindrances. And the reason for that is because I think is that dukkha is attractive. That it's very easy to slip into it, that we're in the habit of doing that. But once we get on guard for what is suffering and what is not suffering, then we can sort of tiptoe around it.
Right.
And so this is the right way of talking about it too, because at that level, and in fact it's very much wrapped up with it, that when we can live a life free from hindrances all the time, then that is a way of talking about enlightenment. That the Buddha was very, very clear in Sutta number 36 when he says that he's finally figured out what the path to enlightenment is. It's the first jhana. And then he says, why was I suspicious of the pleasures of that first jhana when those pleasures are not the pleasures of the world, pleasures of materialism, pleasures of desire, but rather that they're pure pleasure simply because they're mentally manufactured. So in that regard, the Buddha says, aha, that is the correct way, that truly the path to enlightenment is the first jhana, not the higher jhanas. So that
Right.
passage points that the way that getting the mind in this state that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa calls being fit for work, and then being able to stay in that state because we're on guard for the hindrances is exactly the path. And I want to congratulate you for stating it like that.
Okay, perfect.
Even though that was not the answer that I was looking for, because I was looking for the more traditional way of talking about it rather than through the issue of the hindrances and being free from the hindrances, but rather that what's worthy of one's attention is the Four Noble Truths. Being on lookout for this is suffering, this is the cause of suffering. And that also beginning to, how to say it, create or come to an understanding about what it is like for that third noble truth. What is nibbana? In other words, we begin to investigate it in the sense of experiencing it, in the sense of looking for a state of mind that is free from hunger, a state of mind that is satisfied, and start dwelling in that kind of mind state.
Right.
To find for you what feels peaceful and comfortable, and get to a state of not being hungry. Bhikkhu Buddhadasa has actually got a little book on this part of the topic when he talks about the name of the book is Hunger and Happiness. And what he's talking about is that normally in the ordinary people and the people of the world, they see happiness is the satisfaction of a hunger. So that we get hungry for something, we want something, and then we get it, and then we're satisfied, and so we're happy. But the deeper teaching of the Buddha teaches that, oh no, anything that we grasp and consume is going to turn to shit. No shit. Anything that we grasp hold of is going to rot. And the harder we hang on to it, the faster it's going to rot. And therefore, getting our hungers satisfied and thinking that's happiness is delusional. That real happiness comes from not being hungry. And that's a difference.
Right.
Not being hungry is different than being hungry and then getting that hunger satisfied.
Right.
Now, there's also a third kind of happiness, which is not at all. In fact, it's not really happiness at all. It's a kind of happiness that is fake. And that is the anticipation of getting our hunger. So it's the kind of state that a young boy will be in, or a young man will be in, when he finally gets the girl into a room with the door closed. You know exactly the state of mind that kid is in great anticipation. All right?
Right.
Or
Right.
another aspect of that would be thrill seeking. In fact, much of the sports industry is built around people mistaking happiness with excitement. I was like that. My excitement at that level was motorcycles. I've had a few.
Right.
And so been there, done that, but I can also see things like skydiving, or perhaps intramural sports, or old middle-aged men still playing football, and a whole lot of other things like that is showing that they're looking for excitement because they're confusing excitement with happiness. Because excitement is nothing more than the anticipation of getting something. Now here's an example of that. Imagine that you were out in the desert and you were out of water and you were thirsty. And you're walking over one sand dune after another, not getting any better at all. And then you cross another sand dune, and lo and behold, out below, there's an actual oasis, a real one, not a mirage with palm trees and all that kind of stuff. And so here you start going down towards that oasis. Normally what happens, regardless of the physical shape, people are going to run. Why? Because their anticipation of getting that thirst filled. They're excited. All right? Now, as they're running down the hill, the excitement grows. When they get down to the water, they drink their fill, and after they get full of water, they turn over on their back, full and satiated. Now, I ask you, which is the more real happiness? The anticipation running down the hill that they're going to finally get filled, or actually after they have gotten filled?
Actually, after they have gotten filled, because then they don't have desire, right?
Right, exactly. Exactly. So, that's the kind of state that we want to be in, at kind of a little bit further than that, in the sense of being satisfied and satiated without needing anything to get to that state. That we can just create that state of being full, that state of being happy, that state of being satisfied with the way things are right now. And it's actually not so difficult, because you've already started that practice. So beginning to look at that third noble truth and beginning to look deeply into what is it to be really satisfied? What is it to be contented? Now the Buddha also talks about it in the sense of the four characteristics of, or the four modes of clinging, rather. The four modes of clinging, that when we're finished with those four modes of clinging, there's a symbolic way of looking at it. One is to dropping what is normally translated in the English language as the bar or the crossbar. And probably what this is a crossbow, some sort of weapon. And so once we have the Dhamma, or once we have no hunger, once we're in a state of satisfaction, we don't need protection. We already have the feeling of security and protection built in. The second one is the filling in of the moat or the trench. All right, now what are moats or trenches? Another way of talking about a moat or a trench is like a wall or a fortress. But we can also use these as boundaries, in the sense of this is part of the territorial instinct of setting these boundaries. But when we don't need to have boundaries, when we recognize that there's really no us and them, there's only us, that them is us too, and so we don't have to keep those boundaries. We don't have to feel insecure so that we have to build walls for protection or whatnot. The next one is dropping the bolt from the door. Now this is a very deep thing, because what we're talking about here is when we unbolt the door, that's like unbolting the door to our heart. This is where we're completely open, because we're completely honest and completely vulnerable, but that vulnerable is a vulnerability that's in safety. In other words, I'm vulnerable to be completely open, because ultimately I know that it's my mind that can hurt me, not anything else.
Right.
And another way of looking at it is that because we've cleaned house, more or less, our house is actually cleaned out, and so now there's nothing worth stealing. That we're not clinging to anything anymore. Another way of looking at it also is that the only thing that can come to disturb this state is death itself, and there's no stopping that. You cannot bolt your door to stop death coming. And so we unbolt the door to our heart. Okay. The next one is the banner. And this is really, really significant, that we lower the banners. These are the icons. These are the symbols, the maps. Excuse me, not maps. The flags that associate us with a particular group of people in relationship. That means that we're separate from another group of people. An example of that would be the Islamic flag and the Christian flag. Or how about the American flag and the French flag, or the Russian flag, or the Chinese flag, and all of this is just separation. And so we stop identifying. Another way is to hold, let us say, a favorite football team, possibly because everybody in the city is normally associated with that football team, and so we cheer for that football team. So that's another way of holding, is by cheering for a particular sport team, cheering for a particular political party, cheering for a particular government, cheering for a particular church group over a different church group, or two rioting groups in a town, or two protesting groups in a town. Whichever group that is protesting, I'm not there. I'm not that. This is not who we are. We do not associate with groups of people who are unhappy with the way things are and want them changed. So this is what we mean by lowering the banner, that we no longer associate or identify with any particular group of people other than that group of people that are worth identifying with, which are the ones who also don't identify with others that identify with things. And so you can have the group of non-identifiables, which for short I would call them Dhamma dudes. The group in the Dhamma, which do not hang on any particular group, and even see the Buddhist religion as merely just another religion. Because ultimately the only thing that we can claim is human. Everything else is cultural. Everything else is like a flag, not only to identify with, but that somebody hands you that flag and we ignorantly take hold of it because it's given to us, sometimes at a very early age.
Right.
And in fact, religion is a symbol or a banner that people cling to best if they're given it when they're very young. Another quality of that, however, is that the military, even in times of great strife, they still would take the younger boys than the older men. Why is that? Well, because after a man gets 30, 35 years old, he's not nearly as controllable. He's not nearly as impressionable. How dare I say it? He's not nearly as stupid as the young kids are that'll go trotting off looking for glory, when in fact all they're going to get from that joining that army is misery.
Yeah. Okay.
And certainly old men are going to be too wise. Now they'll make excuses like I'm too old, but really, and this is the issue with Socrates. In fact, do you know that this was actually the issue that caused his death? Was that he was going around telling the young men of Athens, I mean, they were getting ready for the Peloponnesian Wars, and he came about, and he was saying, hey guys, don't go to war. You don't need to go to war. That's stupid. the elders of the place, they got really unhappy with Socrates when he was telling all the kids, hey, you're really stupid to go to war, really stupid to join the army. I imagine if we go to go to Russia and start telling that openly and see what happens. Or even the U.S. So that's the way of looking at these ideas of banners, is the identification, and that we identify with things through ignorance. So the wiser we get, the more we recognize that I look at me as me and somebody else as something other than me is only because of my own ignorance about them. Once I know them, then they're acceptable. Now that happens all the time. In fact, every racist in the United States will always come out with, but I know one black man, I have one black friend. And so in that regard, by knowing someone, we begin to identify more with them and cling less to the old identification, so that we begin to open things up. And one of the things we eventually start doing is even opening it up to the animals, start having real compassion for animals. And
right.
That's part of what's happened. In fact, part of the wakening up of society, you know. Now that we've got automobiles and other transportations, animal rights have really come up. But in the time when animals were used for labor, as slavery, I mean, animal slavery is just another form of slavery.
Right.
But we've woken up to that. And we begin to see that, yes, animals have feelings too. Animals have rights too. They need to be well treated, because they're part of the web, or the fabric of the existence that we're in. And so in that regard, we even drop that label of, well, I'm better than the dog because I'm human.
Yeah.
Where in fact, that may not be true. That may be my delusion. And so, by dropping the flag, by dropping the weapons, by unbarring the door, and by filling in the boundaries and the moats, we can see that those are actually the four instincts. The weapon is, in fact, the second instinct, which is normally called procreation, but that's the instinct that we got our first weapons from anyway. And the banner is fairly clearly the nesting instinct of, this is my nest and that's your nest. And the mode is clearly the tribal instinct, leaving that unbolting of the heart as the deepest of them all, down at the level of the self-preservation instinct. Now, the guys who labeled that, they knew what they were talking about, but they mislabeled it. Its better label would be organism preservation instinct. So down at that base level of instinctual behavior, we want a kind of closeness, to bar the door, to lock, for protection. But when we recognize that there's no need for protection, we can actually go and be completely open-hearted, completely open. And so this is the state that one can look at in the sense of being free from all four modes of clinging. And all four modes of clinging, that's part of the process of the mind, you know, that once we have feelings that are ignorantly arising, the I like it becomes an I want, and or the liking becomes wanting. The wanting becomes grasping and clinging, in the sense of, that's where the I comes in, and with the I, that comes suffering. I want it, therefore I suffer because I don't have it. And so I'm planning on getting it, and now we're all stuck in the hindrances.
Right.
And so, exactly, you can see how all of this stuff just fits right into place. It's almost like a Chinese wooden box puzzle. And it's amazing to see how those puzzles just fit all together with all of those strange parts.
Right.
So this is what it's like. That third noble truth then is the ability to understand what it's like to be free from suffering, because we're free from all of the modes of clinging, because we're not identifying with organizations, we're not identifying with boundaries, we're not identifying with organizations. And by the way, another thing about all of that organization and all of that flag stuff, that's where all of the rites, rules, and rituals come in. That's the Sila-Bhatta Paramasa. Once we get rid of the flag, then we're no longer bound to the duties of that flag. And so by not identifying with any organization at all, you're not bound to any of the requirements that organization puts upon you. That your only duty now is the duty of the Dhamma, which is suffering and no suffering.
Right.
So this is one of the ways of starting to reflect. So whenever you recognize that the mind has wandered away again and you come back into this happy state, reflect upon these four things to be free from them. Free from the flags or the banners, free from the weapons, free from the boundaries, and free from the closed house, that we're open. And you could stay there and sit in that moment and just enjoy the fact that this is a state of no hunger. This is a state of complete satisfaction. Let me investigate what it's like to be completely free from suffering, completely open and free. And so now the thoughts that you will have, because you haven't gone into second jhana, there's still thoughts. Now the thoughts that you'll have are very similar, in fact, to the kind of thoughts that have given rise to the talk that I've given. In other words, you re-inspect, you re-go over these issues with the idea of, am I free from that? Am I free from this? This is, in fact, one of the things that I haven't told you about, which I'll introduce now. This is called the Sambu Jhana, which is in many suttas, but one of the places is right in the Anapanasati Sutta, where the Buddha talks about unremitting mindfulness. Okay, so this is already what we've been working on. And now the next step is unremitting investigation. All right? Well, in the beginning, the unremitting investigation was merely just to keep the mind free from hindrances. Now that we've got the mind free from hindrances, now the mind is free to investigate the Dhamma. We're free to investigate what it's like to be in that state of freedom, that third noble state. A lot of teachers don't talk about that third noble state, but we need to. We need to really get the students to understand, this is what we're looking for. Let me see if I can get into that state and kind of maintain it with those deep, long breaths. That's the way of looking at it. So this is the way that we look at that third noble truth. Is not a philosophical state, but rather it's a lab experiment.
Right.
Okay, so that's the way that we're going to practice, is add that third noble truth into your repertoire. And you can ask yourself this simple question that will take you into that. And that simple question is Am I hungry? Or am I free from hunger?
Okay.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Get into
I'm
those
gonna do
states of
that.
and look at all the things that we can, in fact, be hungry for. We can be hungry for contentment, or we can just be contented. We can be hungry for security, or we can just be secure. We can be hungry for feeling good, or we can just feel good.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, well, let's finish this off now and give you that experiment to go with and see what happens, all right?
All right, perfect.
Excellent. Okay, well, we'll see you later.
Yeah, thanks so much. Later.
Okay, enjoy your lunch.
Yeah, thank you. Bye bye.